Good afternoon or good morning. We are delighted to have you joining us for this first official Readiness Project event. I know we had hoped to, many of us, be together today in Louisville for the kickoff of the Ready by 21 national meeting. And I must say, I'm just smiling as I look at the chat box and see how many of us are coming together now. It is always like a family reunion, and I feel like we're doing a little bit of a family reunion here in a virtual space. Many of you we were able to spend time with together back in November in Pittsburgh, where we introduced the ideas of the Readiness Projects. It was just as we were beginning to get some funding to be able to do this work together. That was a lot of a volunteer and shareware kind of event with all of you that were involved. But we used that meeting to really gauge interest in working together and thinking about how do we leverage science findings from a lot of the recent consensus building efforts, the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development, the Science of Learning and Development Alliance, the recent Problems of Adolescents report, and others that are really having people think about how to change the narrative around where, when, how, and why, and with whom we need to invest to ensure that each and every young person really realizes their potential to thrive. How do we make sure that this happens, and how do we work together? Themes from that meeting and subsequent discussions with many of you really reinforce this idea that we posed there of what are some things that we can do together that really help to advance kind of stickier narratives about how science and research on learning and development happen, how they can be used to really advance equity and thriving, how we really amplify the voices of youth and community leaders and ask how a more robust approach to equity and thriving can support and refine their agendas. How do we get a deeper understanding of the essential role of all adults in all settings, when, where, and with whom learning happens, and really prioritize efforts to recognize and act upon their perspectives? And then this is one that sort of came up in that meeting, I'm going to add it as a fourth, was how do we articulate the need to advance this idea of a thriving youth field? Kind of similar to what we have in early childhood, but something that really is working to align work within and across systems. As we've talked with you and really been thinking about how to spark those kinds of connections and unleash energy, we've made these the project priorities for the Readiness Projects. We know that we're putting out some pretty bold statements, and we don't think you'll be surprised if you know how the forum is and how we like to do business. Here's what we're thinking about. How can we dramatically change the odds for children and youth if we commit to upend inequities, embrace science-informed strategies, and work together to really accelerate progress? Changing the odds for young people rather than just helping individual young people beat the odds, that's long been our clarion call and the work that we've all done together with you over the years. How do you really align across this work? And how do you do it in a way that really starts with young people at the center as a way to help people understand the need for that whole child, kind of whole community approach that really builds those bridges in the work and puts young people at the center, not systems at the center. As we start this work together and really trying to support the work that you're doing, also probably no surprise that we had to reach out to some partners to be able to do it. Our coordinating partners in this work are the National Urban League and the American Institutes for Research. And we have partners with us here this morning to help tee up the conversation that we hope to have with you today. In today's conversation, we will be doing this in some short segments. And so we're starting with our conversation with the Readiness Project partners, moving into a focus on relationships and why they really matter, and then having a conversation about, especially given these times, the conversations folks are having of what does summer look like in a year like this? So we'll be having that conversation and then doing a wrap up with a number of our partners that have been really having ear to the ground in the policy space and helping us think about what are some of the actions we need to be taking near term and longer term to really make a difference. I am going to ask my friends from the National Urban League and American Institutes for Research to join, and I think Hal is going to be up first. Hal is the EVP for Education and Development Health, the National Urban League. He's been leading a small but mighty team there that keeps their feet on the ground and their eyes on the bigger prizes. You were an active participant, Hal, in the Seed Commission, co-chairing the Equity Working Group. You're actively now working as an advisor with the SOLD Alliance. And you've had a long-standing commitment to staff and support the Table of Equity and Social Justice organizations and work in partnership in all of those efforts. You have an extraordinarily full plate. I know the hours that you keep. With everything else on your plate, why did you think it was important to add this partnership and be a part of this coordinating team for the Readiness Projects? How is this really helping you think about and accelerate the work that you think is most important right now?
Thanks, Maria. I mean, I think it's fairly clear to everyone at the National Urban League and with all of our affiliates across the affiliate movement that what we are not just advocates, civil rights advocates, equity advocates, but we also deliver programs. And in the delivery of those programs, in our equity work, in the work that we do across other areas such as workforce development and health, we're very clear that we need to work comprehensively. And the Readiness Project for us is exactly that. It's the opportunity to tie together the science, what we know, what has been proven, with some of the things that we know from our practice. You know, we're very clear that while not everything is going to be gold standard research, that there are things that we learn in our programs that most of the folks here on this call also recognize in their programs as things that work, things that are impactful for our communities. And we see this as an opportunity to blend our practice work, our policy work, our equity work, all together with a real clear sense that we can do more to bring about a more robust equity by focusing on all three things simultaneously and by inviting in conversations that focus on solutions and not just analysis. You know, the analysis is very, very important, but we want to make sure that there are opportunities for young people that cut across funding lines, that cut across what might be a traditional sector, after school versus workforce development versus summer youth employment. These are all opportunities for the folks on this call and the folks who work in the sector to really think about our work in a different fashion, perhaps a fashion that allows us into the education conversation. So for the National Urban League and many of you, I would imagine, education is not the same thing as schooling. So teaching and learning wherever it takes place is what we're focused on, including the adult learning, the people that work most closely with young people, the kinds of things we need to do to help prepare those workers, the kinds of things we need to do, support them in process, in addition to the things that we need to do with and alongside young people to build their agency, their thriving, and that we alone are in this sector focused on these kinds of things that can work comprehensively and across these lines, mostly artificial lines, in order to accomplish our work. The last thing I'll say is, you know, we are all spending our time focused on the problems, right? The inequities that affect us now and that have been exacerbated exponentially during this time. However, we mustn't lose sight of the persistent inequities that have remained for decades, unremarked upon and seemingly unremarkable, but devastating in that they have most clearly been understood as part of the normal that we seek to get back to. So there are certain pressure points that have emerged and become starkly clear during this time of the pandemic, but there are underlying things that we believe the Readiness Project can help us address that have been a part of the normal, of the status quo, that we'd like to upend, challenge, and bring about additional quality, equity, and thriving in our work.
And if there's ever a time to think about how to upend things, now it's bringing this into such stark relief that we are so glad to be in partnership together with you. I know you were talking about the kind of connections across all of your work in the visual that we have up on the screen right now, in terms of that kind of broader ecosystem and really all the places that young people kind of need to navigate in their daily lives. That piece I've heard you talk about so much is that it really does have to start with a focus on the young people and on the families and communities as the center of this work. I'm wondering as we bring David on, if David, you can talk to us also about how how your work is sort of bridging across these different areas, and why you think this is essential for the work there that you do at American Institutes for Research. I know that you have been connected for years to this work. I'm not going to call out how long, but you've authored some incredible pieces that have really helped us all think differently about how to keep young people at the center. I also know that you're having some technical challenges today, and so you're joining us via phone, and we're going to see if we can hear you and clearly and well right now. Your colleague Deb Roney's ready to step in if we have a challenge. But welcome, David. And if you could speak to the other version of that 4 quadrants view that we had there just a moment ago.
I will be happy to. So I hope I'm being heard right now. I am really so excited to be with everybody and to work with the forum and with the National Urban League. I just echo the things that we've heard already. And I do so in part because of the fact that though I would have used different words at different times, my whole life career has been about robust thriving and robust equity and how that can ultimately contribute to transformative learning. And, you know, people see AIR or me in one place. I've actually worked alone, but with my AIR colleagues in and across all 4 of those quadrants. So let me just give you an example. If we start on the left with education, I had the good fortune with a lot of people to lead national centers, including National Center on Safe Supportive Learning Environments. In terms of, if we go down to safety and those children who are not necessarily made safe by how we treat them, that I lead centers and do research and work regarding young people who are both in the child welfare system and in the juvenile justice system. And if we go between safety and basic service, so with the green, led centers, and we are still doing lots of work that in communities that relate to issues of children and youth mental health and transitions, opportunity youth, and dealing with issues of trauma. That if I go up to, again, between green and we're now up to the yellow, that I've had the really good fortune of working with families and youth and justice organizations regarding the pipeline to prison. And a lot of this work comes together because that AR supports the interagency working group and youth programs. And I'm so thrilled to work with Deb and colleagues because of the fact that they really are doing work in the out-of-school space that I used to work in. It's so important to me. And we're poised to synthesize, translate the science findings of the SOLD learnings and other work so that they can be used in out-of-school time and also in all the other systems. And what I know is one of the persons who had the good fortune of synthesizing a lot of the work is whenever people apply work in their own context and practice, we learn new things and it has to be adapted. So that our job is not just putting things out, but to help translate in ways that work for people and at the same time learn more from. Rita said the nature of the work in the SOLD finds is that it's by people, and SOLD is about whole young people being supported by whole adults who are hopefully thriving communities, as always Howe said, they are not necessarily, and as we know, who are part of a world that we're interdependent with. So thank you for letting us participate with you.
Thank you, David. And I think I made out at the end, it started to get a little choppy to the end there, but it's about whole children, whole people, whole communities, and it really is at the center of this work. I'm going to ask Karen.
You got it.
Karen Pittman, co-founder at the Forum for Youth Investment, to chime in and say why the forum was working, continue to work to get this group of folks together.
Great, thanks, Rita, and I will be brief. I think the folks on the phone that know the forum know our commitment to readiness. We've been having the Ready by 21 national meeting, which unfortunately we're not together at this year, and have talked about the importance of moving from completeness to readiness, moving from equality to equity, moving from access to quality. I think the readiness projects and the wonderful work that we've been doing in partnership with Hal at the National Urban League and his team, with David and Deb and their team, through both the SEED work and now the SOLD Commission, the SOLD Alliance, has really helped us understand that we have to actually take things further to talk about thriving, to talk about robust equity, and come back to really push on this definition of equity, not as a compartmentalized definition, but one that really cuts across all the domains in which young people and adults spend their time, and then to really double down on what we mean by learning and development. So if we can go to that next slide to play with those. When we were with the commission, our focus was really to push in on this idea of where and when learning happens. And I think we were successful, thanks to a lot of you all on this call, at really getting that idea across, that we have to think about all adults in all settings, that the science is compelling us to have a fuller view of the contexts in which young people spend their time, and the power of the relationships that they have with those adults in those contexts and with young adults and peers in those contexts. So we were really fortunate to sort of begin to broaden that conversation to talk about not just how learning happens, but where and when learning happens. But now as we move on to really sort of think about what we can do to upend inequity as a part of this readiness projects, working with our coordinating partners, we're really pushing on these ideas, this idea of learning and equity and thriving and how it connects. So let's take a second to just think about how they connect. We can go to the next slide. We've got this idea of not just learning, but transformative learning. And I know a lot of the folks on the phone, Castle and others, are really pushing us beyond how do we talk about making sure young people have social emotional skills and competencies, to how do we make sure that they're using and understand the importance of having those skills and competencies as their way of actually enabling themselves to get towards thriving, to get towards an integrated identity, as Camille Farrington talks about, to get towards this full sense of agency. So as we're bringing in this concept and these ideas about learning and development, we want to make sure that we're pushing us towards a definition of learning that really is youth-centered and youth-empowered. The same is also true on that equity side. We often talk about educational equity or race equity or economic equity. All of those domains are critical for thriving. And so what we see is we have these enablers that need to be kicked in. When we help young people really become sort of full agents of their own learning, we're really helping them move their individual enablers towards being thriving youth. When we help really at the broad societal level address these huge drivers of inequity across our systems, we're also clearing the path for young people to move towards thriving, other things being equal. But the place where we have an opportunity to dig in because of the science of learning and development, the science of adolescence, is to actually connect the two, to connect robust equity to transformative learning by making sure that the settings where young people spend their time are really vibrant, important, supportive, and we're going to go on to talk about that for the rest of the session. So we've been working with and have the fortune of working now with the SOLD Alliance, and in particular with Turnaround for Children. And so this idea of what optimal learning looks like is so important. And those of you who've heard us, any of us over the past year, have heard about the blue wheel. And so we're going to go right into this idea of what does it take to optimize learning and development? And if we can get the blue wheel up on the slide, we see that the idea is that we have to start with positive developmental relationships. That's really where the game changer is. We start there, then we make sure that the environments are filled with safety and belonging, and we check in with young people to make sure that they feel safe in their belonging, because that's not always an assumption. We add in integrated supports. Then we move on through to make sure that we're helping them develop these skills, critical skills, mindsets, and habits through the insertion of rich instructional experiences of all kinds. And so what's really been useful in the couple of, the year plus since the SEED Commission is being a part of a context of folks who are really helping us understand that while focusing in on social and emotional learning and social and emotional skill building is critically important, and is especially important to making sure that's integrated into academics in schools, we have to double down on this idea of starting with relationships, that these are the non-negotiables, and that if the settings where young people spend their time aren't really sort of in the green or in the blue, in this case, in all of these places, we'll have a challenge. So with that, we are really going to take the next segment after a small break to go, or not a small break, we're going to go right into talking to Kent. You lost your break, folks. Sorry about that. We're going to go right into talking to Kent Peckles from the Search Institute, who's going to talk to us about what we mean by developmental relationships. So we will promise you a break after this segment, but let's keep moving in and get Kent on the phone.
All right, so Kent, come on up, and Hal and I will see you at the end.
Wonderful. So Kent, I know that we started out and have asked you to do the almost impossible task of taking what would have been a wonderful presentation and cramming it down into 6 minutes. But let me just jump in. I think your bio is going to be sort of stuck up in the chat space. So for folks that don't know Kent, I think you all probably do know him. He is the CEO and president of the Search Institute, has a background in education and in youth development as well, and has really been instrumental in sort of bringing to the forefront this idea that it starts with relationships. And obviously that is now more than ever. So Kent, jump right in with us and talk to us about why, as we're talking about relationships, it's so important to understand, if we're going to get the full impact of relationships being a driver towards thriving, why we have to have a more sophisticated, nuanced understanding of what we mean by developmental relationships.
That's fantastic. I think, Karen, from almost everybody who's taking their time on a day like this to be on a webinar, the power of relationships is a given. And it's something that we've dedicated all of our research to at Search Institute. And for those of us who've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, whether you're a researcher or a practitioner, we are living through an unbelievable moment of both crisis and opportunity. As we are literally socially distancing, we are all experiencing, both personally and professionally, the power of relationships that is borne out in research. And I would submit that if we are going to take advantage of this opportunity collectively as a field, as you just suggested, Karen, we need to do, we need to be mindful not just of the science, but of the communication of the science. And so I want to plant one seed with all of you who are out there today, that as you are thinking both about using technology to build relationships in the interim, but especially as you look ahead to reopening of schools and youth programs next fall, which will happen at some point, we need to be attentive not only to the kind of analytic and intellectual work that the SOLD Alliance is doing, which is fantastic, but to how we convey it. So very briefly, what you see on the screen there are the 5 elements of a developmental relationship that have emerged from Search Institute's research. And we can show empirically that when kids experience relationships that are characterized by high levels of those 5 elements in families, in schools, and in out-of-school time programs, their outcomes are better, their risk behaviors are lower, and they're more on the path to thrive. But we knew going into this research that not only we, but many experts are prone to put all of their eggs in the basket of their content, and they don't think deeply about the communication of that content. And so we concurrently discovered a wonderful organization called Frameworks Institute, based in Washington, D.C., that does think deeply about the communication of this content. And so we partnered with them on a multi-year project of applied research to understand not just how we understand the science of developmental relationships, but how we think about the way that especially the public perceives relationships. And we learned some lessons, and we developed a tool that I'll kind of just quickly share with you here. One difficult lesson we learned is that when we rush straight into talking about the kind of elements you see there on the screen, or frankly, the kind of graphs that we just briefly looked at, we lose a lot of people. And we don't lose them just because it's wonky stuff that has a lot of words on screens. What Frameworks research, which is both quantitative and qualitative, showed us we lose is that for many in the general public, when you mention relationships in kids' lives, their mental model is of the primacy of the family relationship. And that if the relationship a kid has got at home is positive and nurturing and caring, they're probably very likely to succeed in life. But that, and critically for us, if the relationship is perceived as dysfunctional or uncaring, that there's not much that a teacher, a youth worker, a mentor, somebody can do, because the public perceives those relationships as so much less powerful than the relationships in the family. So for a bunch of applied researchers like Search Institute, our immediate reaction to that problem is, we'll show you more data and we'll give you more analysis. And what we learned from Frameworks Institute is that that actually can backfire, and that in fact our well-intentioned desire to bring the science to the fore can undermine making the case for relationships. And so if we flip to the next slide briefly, what Frameworks helped us think deeply about was the power of metaphor. And what you see right there in that picture of a tree with some roots is what we think is a pretty powerful metaphor for the role of relationships in youth development. I gotta say before I share this, that this metaphor beat out the one that I and other researchers fell in love with and have been using, which is that developmental relationships are like fluoride in toothpaste. In particular, Junlei Lee and Megan Julian did a great article a number of years ago, and they took that metaphor and really built it out to be the active ingredient in any youth program or intervention for kids. So I ran around the country and put into articles and even wrote an article that was a response to their article called Finding the Fluoride. And when Frameworks tested that metaphor, they found it doesn't fly. It doesn't seem organic enough. It seems too productized, and even the cavity fighting properties of fluoride didn't connect. And long story short, what Frameworks Institute came up with was this very organic metaphor of the roots of a tree. It could be a plant too, but we're building on the tree. And that those roots are the relationships in kids' lives. And so you have a lot of roots, it's a web. You can have deep roots, maybe those family relationships, but the smaller, shorter roots also matter dramatically. And when those roots are strong, they actually can help the tree, the young person, grow and thrive and withstand the storms that life throws at them. And then finally, the reason we think this metaphor is what Frameworks would call a generative is that it doesn't stop with the tree. The soil within the roots are growing. If it's full of toxins, it is going to influence the development of that young person. But if it's full of nutrients, if it's full of the kind of environments that the Sold Alliance is urging us to create, the roots are stronger and the young person's more likely to thrive. And so we're trying hard in our work to build on this metaphor. We're even playing with the leaves being the social, emotional, and other competencies that kids need to thrive. And we're also beginning to think not just about metaphor, but story as another way. So if I had one big takeaway to urge people as we all try and seize this moment of opportunity to elevate relationships in the public discourse, and frankly, public and private investment in relationships, so we got to think as creatively about the communications as we are about the content.
I love this. I mean, it's perfect because, you know, as you said, those roots are showing the relationships. They're so varied in both their directionality, their size, their length. You can think about the taproot as being the root in the family. Those taproots can get damaged, but if you have enough other roots in the root system, the tree can still stay healthy. And so it's a wonderful metaphor for the relationships, with that soil being the context. And then clearly the tree is young people thriving with all of the complex elements. So I hope we can work with that, and that you'll let us work with that all together as a wonderful way to sort of bring these ideas together and think more robustly about what they all mean. Let me ask Robin to sort of get herself unmuted and put her video on, because it's really interesting that the decision that you made to sort of get Frameworks involved to say, we're making all of these, just doing this wonderful science translation and making all of these analogies and making all of these graphs and images, but do they really work? And how do people who are really in the mix of doing this work see them? And so one of the things that the National Urban League did was to decide to do a listening tour of the stakeholders that they work with to find out, do these things that have been developed by the Seed Commission and Sold and Whole Child Frameworks, and is all of this really helping us? So Robin, come on screen and tell us a little bit about the listening tour and give us a little bit of a sense, if you can zoom in, because I know you have a lot of information, but we don't have much time. If you can zoom in on how these things really were responded to when you showed them to parents and families.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. And Ken, I appreciate your presentation and really the metaphor of rootedness and relationships. As Karen mentioned, we at the National Urban League conducted a series of listening sessions over the past 6 months and really worked on elevating the frameworks of sell, seed, sold, and whole child equity with an eye toward engaging people in the conversation who are often on the receiving end and not involved in the construction of these concepts and frameworks. We were able to engage a number of different stakeholder groups, from early childhood to K-12 educators, to researchers of color, those in the social work, wellness, and juvenile justice sector, and also after-school providers and arts educators. And what we found in those sessions was that everyone did have particular reactions. The ones I'm going to focus on right now, though, are our parent sessions. We held 2 parent sessions. One was in October in New Orleans, the other in New York and in February. And over the course of those 2 sessions, as parents looked at the variety of frameworks, some of which have already been presented this morning, 4 questions kept coming up. Who is implementing this framework, and were parents included in the creating of it? Where is there an acknowledgement of the historical inequity and the need for cultural context in these frameworks? What's going to happen if an adult doesn't get this right? Where's the accountability? And where do I, as a parent, a grandparent, or a parenting adult fit in the process? So it was really good to hear that the Search Institute, through their work, has really a clear focus on testing out the utility of these messages and tools, both for parents and the public, and that they're thinking about how to bring this information directly to families. As they do that, we would really want to, again, encourage them to think about what we learned from the parent sessions. And there are 5 things I want to focus on. One is that safety of mind, body, and spirit is paramount for parents so that the child can learn and thrive. That safety cannot be fully actualized if there are not opportunities for parents to be able to co-create his or her relationship with that institution, that the lack of connections and alignment actually perpetuates an unsafe environment for that child. And as such, it is important to remember historical context, seek understanding of that context, and co-create meaning with family, with community. And most importantly, involve parents in the process of creating the social emotional approaches, implementation, examination, reflection, and growth of those processes. We believe that the 5 developmental relationships, the elements that were highlighted, are absolutely important and spot on. As we think about co-creating meaning and opportunity for parents and families, we encourage everyone to really be intentional about where parents fit in this picture, all parents. We can extend things like developmental frameworks into the parent-child relationship. These same steps extend not just to the youth, but to the entire family unit. These elements exist and need to be supported in both realms of that child's experience, and that the challenge, opportunity, and request that came for the parent sessions is something that we can all act upon. So we really see this as an opportunity to deepen our understanding of the complexities of developmental relationships and what comprises that, to share information with those parents, and to co-create possibility with an eye toward accountability and getting this right for our children with an eye toward equity.
Thanks, Robin. And I know that that was just a taste of the exciting work that's around framing, around taking these really critically important ideas and getting them to be stickier. So I really want to applaud both Kent and the Search Institute, and Hal and Robin and team at Urban League of going out and finding out if these work and how they work. I know we're about to make a segue into a real break this time, but Kent, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to say, I know that you've been taking these ideas out to families. How do they respond to this more robust definition of developmental relationships?
Well, it's a great question. And family work is a huge part of ours. And so absolutely amen to all of the work that we just heard about. We haven't started using the roots metaphor with families. This webinar literally, and one we did this morning, was the national debut of the roots metaphor. So you all were here first, and we'll see if it gets any traction. We were gonna debut it at the forum conference, and so now we did it virtually. But I will say that the 5 elements resonate very strongly with parenting adults, and parenting adults look at them, and actually it is a helpful way for them to think about relationships as frankly beyond caring. Because when we talk to parents and frankly practitioners about relationships, it often starts with and stops with caring. And we know that caring is necessary but not sufficient if it's a developmental relationship. The final thing I'll say too, that I think Robin's comments highlight, is while we know that all 5 of these relational elements are critical for development, they happen differently depending on context, depending upon race, depending on culture. The one that we see that's most obvious is the sharing power piece. Parents and adults share power dramatically differently based on their lived experience and culture. We also have recently been looking at some data that suggests the last element of expanding possibilities, which takes us from developmental psychology and relationships kind of into the realm of social capital and networks that help you get ahead. Kids experience that very differently along lines of race, culture, and socioeconomic status. So the 5 elements we think really resonate with parenting adults. It's going to be really interesting to see if the roots metaphor is useful for them as well.
Great. Thank you, Kent. Thank you, Robin, for getting this teed up. We know we can come back and do this a lot more and have deeper conversations. There are things going into the chat about opportunities to learn more about the frameworks work. We'll keep you posted as the listening tour information comes out from the National Urban League, and we've also got important information coming out from Ed Trust in the same space. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to take this conversation into the idea of summer. We know that young people are going to be coming into summer wanting relationships. We know there's going to be a press for learning. We have to figure out how all of this mashes up and how we leverage what we know about relationships and context to create optimal opportunities for learning and engagement and development in the summer and take those lessons into the fall and the rest of the year. So take a second, breathe, stand up, stretch. We'll be back in a minute. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am Deborah Maroney, and I'm so honored to be here with all of you. I was watching all the texts go by in the comments and getting a little bit verklempt. I miss all of you and miss seeing you at this time of year. Kent's conversation around relationships really hit it home for me and missing all of our connections. And if we haven't met, I would have enjoyed the opportunity to do so in person, and I can't wait to do that. We're waiting for another Jennifer. Jen Sarangelo, if you're in the house and want to join us, please do so. Okay. Hi, Jen. Okay, super. So we're here to talk about summer, and all of us, all of you know, have personally experienced, know from your practice work, know from research and policy, that summertime affords a really optimal time for learning and development to promote health, safety, and the well-being of children and youth. It's an ideal time to elevate the strengths and assets in a community, and it's something that we all really look forward to focusing on and planning for at this time of year. At the same time, it's a bit of a question mark for all of us. I'm a parent of teenage boys. If you know me, you've heard my stories. It's a big question mark for us and our family. And that's true throughout the country. It's a question mark for families, for school districts, for systems builders like the ones we have on this call, and certainly for youth development professionals. So I'm going to steal Kent's tree metaphor. I'm not going to steal it. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it out. So I was thinking about our field as that tree, and that those roots were all of us and the relationships that we've built over the many, many years. And the top of the tree was the field that everyone else sees. And so I just want to recognize right now that we've asked wonderful field leaders, who I'm going to introduce in just a minute, to talk about something that's a question mark for many of us, and appreciate their trust in us to let them have that open conversation in this open forum and without seeing all of you. So I have with us today Jennifer Sarangelo with 4-H. You'll see their bios coming up in the chat box. Jennifer Peck with the Partnership for Children and Youth, and Ross Wiener with the Aspen Institute. I'm going to ask each of them the same question. What are you thinking about as a summertime right now, as a national youth development organization, as a state system for after school and expanded learning, and as a convener in the K through 12 space? So I'll ask Jennifer to kick off and respond to that question. And we're going to be trusting of all of our relationships, and let us have a little bit of a conversation about this with all of you watching. Jennifer?
Thank you so much, Deb. I'm honored to be here and so excited to see so many friends. I'm glad that there were so many people announcing themselves in the chat box, so we kind of knew who was in the house. So it's great to virtually be together. And so my name is Jennifer, and I'm the CEO at 4-H, the National 4-H Council. And just so I think many of you know our work, and we are partners together on many levels at the state through after-school networks, or through local, county level, and city partnerships. So it's been a very interesting spring for everyone. And in 4-H, we have pivoted almost instantly to offering what 4-H does in a virtual environment today. So our 4-H clubs are open, running, doing all the things you might think of with 4-H, virtual fair, virtual camp, online competitions, just all of that has moved to online. And to be honest, it's been kind of a swift kick in the pants for us to do what we probably should have been doing all along, but I've been so impressed with Cooperative Extension and their change to this model. As we think about pivoting from what we're doing today, is really trying to support parents and schools through what we're calling 4-H at home, and we have a plethora of things developed by our land grant universities and Cooperative Extension, whether it's interactive learning today, activity sheets, curriculum and resource guides, the 4-H virtual clubs and competitions, webinars for kids that want to do progressive learning in a certain science. Most of it's around science, a lot around gardening, nutrition, things kids need at home right now, and families. But we're pivoting to the summer because unfortunately many of our states have stay-at-home orders and have prohibited anything over 50 or 10 people together. So we are pivoting to what a virtual summer experience looks like in 4-H. So far we have two, to me what we're offering, how I could best explain it is to think about, we've taken that 4-H, our theory of change, And the 3 parts of that research that guide what we do, which are the things that all of us know, we all have our theory of change based on the research, but ours is meaningful adult relationships with young people, skill building activities, and meaningful leadership roles for young people. So we are taking all of that into that online experience, not just content going out, but interactive and community building and belonging as well. And we're looking at it in 2 ways. We're being flexible because it's going to be a different summer, and there's kind of a create your own experience where families can choose from the schedule. So there's, for instance, we've seen a complete breakdown of any walls that were state-based. So almost all 4-H today that might have been done in Maryland or Virginia is today available to all young people, whether they're in 4-H or not. So all those barriers to entry are gone. And we're using a number of different kind of virtual platforms to do that. But things like we have Mindfulness Mondays, we have Watercolor Wednesday, Tuesday and Thursday is Learning from the Living Room, where you can make, for instance, a robot hand through our junk drawer robotics and watch a leader walk you through that, or a teenager. To Field Trip Fridays, where you can go and virtually experience something virtually. So that's kind of a build your own camp experience. And then we're seeing virtual camps. The 2 I'm most familiar with are Texas 4-H has opened their virtual space camp for free to all youth and families, where there'll be different experiences all summer. And also 4-H Water Camp, where kids can do water experiments and learn about environmental education on their own, kind of in their own time, but it's more of a guided experience. So those are some of the ways we have really changed to 4-H at home. And I hope that we're working right now to build more of a national consumer-friendly portal where parents and colleagues like you can find those things to add. We invite everyone to use these 4-H resources for your camps, for your summer learning. They are available. We look forward to those collaborations.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for your leadership in sharing the Choose Your Own Adventure sort of model, and we all look forward to those resources. The space camp sounds super fun. And I'm gonna just pivot a little bit to Jennifer Pack, who leads statewide intermediary, the Partnership for Children and Youth in California, to talk to us about their approach to summer on the policy front.
Thanks, Deb. So just for a little bit of context, the Partnership for Children and Youth ran a statewide campaign to increase access to summer learning opportunities for about 7 years here in California. And our work was very focused on building summer programming that was run very collaboratively between school districts and community-based providers and a lot of other partners. And when it became clear here in our state several weeks ago that school was going to be remote for the remainder of the year, we began to immediately think about how really intense the needs of young people were going to be this summer, and also really understanding that our school systems are so overwhelmed with getting distance learning up and running. And I see this very much from an organizational standpoint in watching what's happening across the state with getting distance learning up and running, but also very much as a parent and watching the daily struggles of my own school district in getting distance learning up and running, and recognizing that it's going to be really hard for our school systems to be thinking about summer in any kind of a coherent way in this context in time to do anything really valuable for kids. And we also started hearing rumblings of some districts saying that they just weren't going to do summer programming because of facility concerns or financing concerns or collective bargaining concerns. And this was really alarming to us because we believed that we collectively have a moral obligation to be doing everything we can over the summer to reach kids, and not just with learning supports, but with the social and emotional supports that so many kids are going to need given how disconnected kids already are. And this is just going to get worse as the months go on. So we decided to approach our School Administrators Association in California, whose membership are district and school leaders, to say that we know how overwhelmed they are
and that they are also thinking about summer, and let us help you. We have a ton of resources, relationships, and we have this very big community of after school and summer program providers across their state that are really big assets in figuring this out. So we have launched a collaboration with them to put together some messaging, tools, and resources for districts, for county offices of education, with a very strong message that this has to be looked at as scenario planning, given that we don't know what summer is going to look like as far as facilities, social distancing rules, et cetera. So we're going to be providing some examples of what plan A, plan B, plan C might look like, and try to be as ready as possible for various scenarios. For example, we might be virtual for a portion of the summer, but what if we have 2 weeks with kids, or what if we have 4 weeks with kids? How are we going to really maximize that time? So we're also coordinating with equity groups here and other state leaders around this message of urgency around summer programming, and that it can't just be focused on learning loss. We're hearing that from some districts that they're planning some remote summer school, but we're only hearing about academic intervention. So we're really trying to get coordinated on this message that summer programming has to lead with re-engaging kids, with relationships, and recognizing the trauma that so many kids are going to be experiencing and coming into this space with. There's so many details to be worked out about all of this, but I agree with what others have said, that this is also a very big opportunity for us to shape summer in a way that's going to be really critical. So that's what we're focusing on here in California.
Thank you. I know we have many network leads and system leaders listening in, and we'll really appreciate that model as they approach supporting their stakeholders in their locale. And just listening to both of you, both of the Jennifers, the stepping up is what stands out to me, not only on behalf of our usual suspect stakeholders and programs, but on behalf of the children and families across the country and in California. So thank you for doing that. And now I'm gonna turn it over to Ross, and Ross, really ask you, I know you have your eye on all of this, but we invited you here today in particular to talk to us about what you're seeing and hearing from the K through 12 perspective as they endeavor to make really important decisions on how learning happens summertime.
Yeah, so really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of the panelists and with so many old friends and longtime colleagues. So hello to everybody who's out there virtually. So I do, in my work at the Aspen Institute, I convene a network of urban school district leaders, superintendents, chief academic officers, chiefs of schools, and have been doing weekly calls with the superintendents for the last month, had one last night. So I'm trying to bring some perspective from what they're going through and what might be most constructive in partnering with school systems this summer, but want to recognize there's just a huge range of approaches and needs and leadership styles. And so these are some sort of framing remarks, and everything needs to then be put in context in a community. One other thing, just as context, I think so many of the people who are part of this community or who are on this webinar today start with developmental relationships, start with some of the grounding in youth development that was the start of this call. And I think that just creates a real strength and assets that you can bring into relationships with schools this summer in particular. Just for what Jennifer Peck said, there is such a huge need, given the dislocation, given the stress and trauma young people and families are experiencing right now, to really focus on those developmental relationships this summer. So just 3 thoughts from sort of a K-12 system perspective, and then a couple of quick pieces of advice. One, many, maybe most school system leaders are still in crisis response. The delivering of food, which was a huge operation, is under tremendous strain. Getting technology devices and connectivity to every student and family is taking a lot of attention. They are feeling intense pressure still to contact all of the students. There are some that they still, are struggling to connect with, and then to get distance learning up and going. So I would say summer is either just coming into focus or frankly is still on the horizon. And that right now, most school system leaders and principals have just limited attention for anything other than immediate response, right? Still right now. 2, they are feeling immense pressure to reconnect with students and to engage with them. And I think they're learning about the need that Jennifer Peck was mentioning about the relationships, the engagement has to come first. We know that from the neuroscience, we know that from the research. That's now being lived in real time. And so they are, again, just feeling a tremendous amount of pressure to get students engaged in relationships with each other and with teachers, and to get them on the pathway to learning, but they're seeing the need for relationships right now, as well-being, as mitigating stress, as all of it. 3rd is just the reality is they're not going to have the capacity in a number of different dimensions to meet the full summer needs of students this summer, even if they want to have full summer school, totally focused on academic learning. Just the strain on the system, the finances, the staff availability, the logistics, they're going to be figuring out what they can do, but there's a huge opportunity for partnership, for coordination, for collaboration. So let me just give like 4 really quick pieces of like advice that occur to me. I mean, one is just to invite people to be creative, but very practical, to come with ideas and suggestions with their school district partners. What can you do this summer? 2, to think about that in the context of new ways of integrating that with connectedness to school. How can you forge relationships with school system leaders, with principals, with teachers, or leverage the ones that you have to make sure that your programming this summer is also an on-ramp, not an alternative to being connected to school. 3, go with who you know. If you have connections with a school principal, with a school system leader, with somebody in the city who's connected to schools, start there. And 4, I would just recommend, and this really is cribbing off a conversation I had with Karen Pittman just last week, of create a virtual space now with some other out of school time providers, some school system leaders, some others, so you can all talk about what are your plans, what are your concerns going into this summer, what capacity do you have to bring, and to just start making concrete plans, because the needs are just going to be immense. And it does feel like there's this opportunity to create new partnerships if it feels to school systems like this is additive and complementary rather than a competition or an alternative.
Thank you. Those are really practical suggestions, Ross. I appreciate that. And I think if you can see me going back and forth, I'm getting distracted. You're all getting so many questions. And so we do just have a couple minutes left, but there were several questions. And I think Jennifer Sarangelo, this first one is for you, but certainly I welcome Jennifer and Ross to weigh in if you have other strategies as well. Folks are interested in how you support families in rural areas with limited access to internet. The question was around your virtual camps in particular, but I think we're all thinking about this as young people have learned to, have gone to a virtual environment for learning and development. Jennifer?
Right. Thank you. And we're finding, Deb, not only, certainly it's a major issue in rural America, but our research shows about 7 million of the 55 million kids out of school right now do not have access to broadband internet. And there's only about 2 or 3 million of them that live in rural. So it is an urban and a rural issue. And we're finding our 4-H in urban areas has the same issue. So we're doing some analog things. I'll be honest, it's while we can want to advocate for the broadband today, tomorrow, next week, these kids need learning now. So we are seeing 4-H linking up in rural areas with how they're distributing food. So 4-H activities, 4-H program in a box going alongside on the rural route school buses that are taking food to common areas. And 4-H is going on the school bus and going with the food. I'm sure a lot of organizations are doing that. We also are fortunate that we have a physical infrastructure in rural America. So we have actual offices and buildings that have good Wi-Fi. So we're making that available so families know when they can go. The Wi-Fi is available if they need to sit in their car and the kids download to their phones the things they need from school or for camp or for the virtual activities. We're boosting that, making that available. And then we're also doing contactless delivery and pickup of 4-H activities and projects. So 4-H offices in rural areas are putting out brown bags in the morning with activities and the materials, and families are coming to pick that up in a contactless environment, and usually they're all gone by about noon. So those are just a few examples of how we're trying to help with this massive issue that has only been exacerbated by the current crisis.
Thank you for that. And there's quite a few others chiming in on the chat box on what they're doing on that issue as well. So a lot of creative ideas. I welcome any final comments on that question from the other panelists. And then unfortunately, I think we have to wrap up.
Just super quickly, I think that what I'm hearing from superintendents is that they feel more confident they're going to be able to close the gaps on technology and Wi-Fi access, and that then the harder part is really connecting with the most vulnerable students who were the least connected previously, and frankly, helping their staffs get a level of confidence and some development themselves on how to be supportive in developmentally appropriate ways right now, how to respond when students share what they're really going through. You can't then just switch straight to, okay, well, glad everybody shared, now we're going into the assignment. So just offering that so as folks think about what guidance and resources they might offer on how to develop and maintain healthy relationships online, there's just a huge need for that kind of thought partnership and development in the field as well.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank my little panel here for championing summer as a really important time for all of us. We're all looking to you for exactly this kind of guidance. And I did see out of the corner of my eye, Karen Pittman committed to us answering all of the questions that are coming in the chat box. So certainly this panel was very fruitful and having folks think of questions and comments, and I think that's really terrific. So I'm going to thank all of you, wish you all a great day, and now we're going to transition to the policy roundup. So those of us on the stage will bid you adieu.
All right, I think we are all here and ready to go for the policy roundup. And we are going to see if we can do this in a little bit of a rapid fire way. And it's really just building out of all the conversations you all have been having over the last several weeks of what is the difference that we can be making now. We know we have the CARES funding is coming through and folks are figuring out how to tap into that, but there are so many that have been in these policy and advocacy conversations, and also just really hearing from folks on the ground about what's needed, that we wanted to have a conversation around solutions and things that folks can connect into and help to make happen. What we're going to do is we have 10 folks that are lined up to be able to give snapshots of what they've been working on and ways that you can connect. You're also going to be seeing in the chat box a little bit a link to a document where you can also add your ideas and reflections and ways to take action and connect. And once we go through that round robin, Hal is going to be kind of wrapping up for us in terms of just the work that he's been doing, connecting around all of these issues and why they're so important during this time. So you're going to start seeing a lot of names coming up on the screen, but we really are trying to say, you'll hear everything from the digital divide conversation to what do we do with summer to what about the most vulnerable youth. So what we're going to start with is there's a few folks teed up to talk about what are we hearing from young people, how are we paying attention to older youth? Are we doing enough in older youth and vulnerable youth during this time? And I'm going to turn now, if we're all here, team, for our Brady Bunch moment, I'm going to turn to Karen Evans, who's Executive Director of the New Orleans Children Youth Planning Board, who's been working with young leaders to get a youth master plan process up and going. But you've been talking with those young leaders about current reality and what differences, what they're seeing as they look at the months ahead and what next. So Karen, if we can bring you on screen, we're sharing videos now.
Okay, there we go.
There we go, Karen.
Good morning, all. Greetings to you all. I am happy to greet you from New Orleans. We're still here. Yes, we're an epicenter and we're still here. I will say to you that the young people that we've had an opportunity to meet with last week and continuing to meet with this week have shared their feelings of stress and anxiety around a couple of different things. One is they feel incredibly disconnected from what they saw as their social network, that not having a connection to their core group of folks who matter to them, it has really been very disconcerting to them. And the other is this anxiousness about what is coming. So summer has often been, in New Orleans particularly, has often been a space where summer employment mattered to our young people. We are a city that has 53% of ALICE households of working poor. Our childhood poverty rate is 39%. Summer has been a place where young people could contribute and participate and often curtail some of their school fees for the coming year. Absent that, given our high tourism and hospitality impact to COVID-19, the city has no idea what the full impact of that is going to be, and our young people are stressed and anxious about that. We see the summer as a tool building, skill building time. It has been around other learning spaces. And if there is this effort to recapture learning or to cause there to be redos where necessary because of the absence of a full school year, then our young people are concerned that they may too not only have a loss of revenue generation for their families and households, given what they've done in the past, but they may also feel very encumbered by the need to catch up on things that are not there, that are affected by things that had no responsibility for them themselves. So we struggle with this stress, tension, fear, and hopefulness that they could in fact have something fresh and new on horizon, but nobody's including them in the conversation. So that is where they're speaking to us now.
And I know part of what Karen's and the team there is doing is actually training some young leaders to actually go out and in a virtual way, listen to young leaders and young people throughout the community over the next couple of months and actually be able to shape kind of agenda for what next, responding now and what next. Thank you, Karen. I'm going to turn over to Caitlin Johnson with Spark Action. And in that, like, what are young people doing now? The young activists that you work with who have moved into a virtual space rather than kind of gathering together, what are you hearing from them?
Thank you, Marita, and thanks, Karen. Hello all from another epicenter. I'm in Brooklyn with Spark Action, the Forum Storytelling and Mobilizing Collective, and we're still here too. And I'll just quickly go through, because a lot of it echoes what Karen just said, but a lot of the young leaders we work with across the country are focused on a lot of different issues, focused on climate change, on justice reform, on access to opportunity, on civic and voter engagement. And we're hearing a lot of the same things. There's a lot of exhaustion. Folks are exhausted, folks are overwhelmed. They're trying to adapt while they're taking care of themselves and their families and their communities. There's a lot of need and question around mental health supports. A lot of questions about the stimulus, who's eligible and what does that mean? And then as Karen said, what is this gonna mean for young people's futures? Young people who are not in school, young people who missed graduation or other milestones. And particularly for young people who were especially vulnerable before all of this, opportunity youth, young people involved in the justice system, parenting young people or young people supporting families. What does this mean? What happens now and what happens next? On the positive side, we are hearing so much an incredible spirit of adaptation and experimentation. I think as adults, we often think that young people live their whole lives digitally, but in fact, youth organizers and young leaders whom we support the bulk of the work has to be done on the ground, developing real relationships, educating and engaging people. And true to the theme of this, it's all about relationships. So this is upending a lot of that work in very real ways. And even the most tech-forward organizers are having to get creative. And a lot of the rallies and events they had planned, particularly civic engagement summits, young people were planning over the spring and summer, all of that's interrupted. A couple of quick examples of how folks are dealing and getting fully digital is really creative experimental ways to share content and share perspective. The Climate Strike Coalition is pivoted to digital, a 3-day digital live stream with experts and influencers and artists and young people starting on Earth Day. There's a lot of creative engagement around the census. Get out the vote and voter engagement town halls and summits that are starting. And then the last thing I'll flag, since this is over a minute, but is that just to echo what Kent said earlier, we're really living in an unprecedented moment of crisis and opportunity. And a lot of the conversation we're hearing from young leaders is as they're working together to create trainings and share peer-to-peer knowledge and ideas, they're also thinking about the longer term. What does this mean about our systems, our institutions? This is, in the words of one young organizer, this isn't just a health crisis. This is really pulling back the curtains on bigger social and economic issues and the crisis of capitalism. We're hearing a really positive note that there is a sense that the government has a role to play, and if it were more effective and people-driven, it would be helping out a lot more in this case. So we're optimistic for the future. And I'll share in the chat some of the resources we're here.
That's great.
Thanks.
Sorry, Kate. Share in the chat. And also, I'm going to remind folks, there is a Google Doc where you can go to and add your own resources, but also see many of the things that folks are referencing. So you can tap into that. And that's also where you see the link that Joanne Pano from National Network for Youth, who used to be with the forum team, has the links to a recent conversation that you all had around homeless and runaway youth. Can you give us a top note from that and how people can take some action in that area?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Marita and Karen, for this opportunity. Again, hi, everyone. My name is Joanne Pano. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the National Network for Youth. We're a membership-driven policy advocacy and public education organization working with local service providers, agencies, and young leaders with lived experiences of homelessness. In regards to some of the conversations that our network has had with federal agencies with regard to a call that took place last month, in which the National Network for Youth brought together local service providers, the U.S. Interagency Council on Youth Homelessness, the CDC, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services. We really tried to uplift the needs that our local providers and our young leaders have been highlighting in their experiences related to COVID-19. So much of what we have been hearing has been related to shelter needs, access to food, housing, mental health and medical care, and even some of the most basic needs that you can think of relating to access to food. We've heard of an instance where a young parent needed assistance with just getting some support and formula for her young child. And so really trying to understand how COVID-19 has really impacted youth who have lived experiences of homelessness and who are also returning clients is something that we have been shifting our attention, energy, and time into. And some areas that we've been focusing on really has been gathering, developing, and circulating resources in real time. A lot of, as Kate had just mentioned earlier, there have been a lot of questions and challenges regarding the economic impact payments through the IRS and through the Department of Treasury, and even with the payment protection plan for nonprofit organizations through the SBA 7A loan program. And so just making sure that folks are sharing and learning from each other is something that we have been focusing our efforts on. And we also encourage folks to share from your communities how you've possibly been implementing and interpreting some of the federal guidelines at the state and local levels. At the National Network for Youth, we've been hosting weekly office hours with our providers just to make sure that they can learn from each other and to also see how local policies are also being implemented.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne. Our next trio is going to talk about what solutions youth programs, youth organizations are focused on. And first, Dan Gilbert with the National After School Alliance. Dan, over to Gina with the National After School Association, and then Gina Warner, and then Jeff Davis with the California After School Network. 1, 2, 3. You guys can do it.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. Dan Gilbert with the After School Alliance. So I'm going to try to go quickly through some of this. I'm going to change a little bit of what I was going to say because I think that Jennifer Peck did a fantastic job of describing kind of the conundrum that we're facing structurally in terms of how summer programs are going to be situated to address this. whether that's just for a couple weeks at the end of the summer, whether or not we might lose the entire kind of in-person summer learning program situation. But I think the concern that we have at the Alliance and that we're trying to strategize around is concern that kind of what we traditionally refer to as summer learning loss isn't just going to be confined to summer anymore with kids out of school for so long. And even with some states discussing potentially not bringing kids back into schools by the beginning of the next school year. And so what we're looking at is strategizing around ways that after school and summer learning programs can prospectively build off of their strengths in a situation because of all of the compounded trauma, because of all of the deep need that there will be for social and emotional skill development amongst youth who are right now going through social distancing and things like that. And so what we at the Alliance are strategically trying to do is make sure, number one, that we make sure that the federal government provides as many resources as possible and streamlines the provision of those resources to programs that need them, both to increase and improve the services that they provide, but also just to stay open. And also to make sure that all of the programs that are doing that on the ground around the country have the information that they need in order to access the resources that are going to be made available for this, and also to build their relationships with schools and districts that are going to be kind of the conduit through which a lot of those resources flow. So sorry, I probably went over a minute, but I tried to be quick.
We're good. Over to Gina.
Hi everyone, so this is Gina Warner with the National After School Association, and I'm just here today to remind everyone that the after school workforce is the workforce for the workforce, and right now the after school workforce is the essential workforce for the essential workers, and that we need to remember full support for their time, training, and safety is key to providing all of these resources we're talking about for young people. None of the ideas we're discussing today for kids or for families are going to be possible if we don't have a workforce to support that. And lest anyone think I may be alarmist here, those of you who know me know that I led the after school intermediary immediately after Katrina, and I can tell you that we will be looking at a workforce crisis when our communities open back up. We will be competing against retail establishments, fast food restaurants, Amazon, which didn't exist 15 years ago. And so we need to be prepared and understand that we need to make provisions. All the policy initiatives we're talking about, all the private initiatives, we need to make sure that we are securing funding for the workforce so they are there to be able to deliver services. So yes, this is a crisis, and our workforce is on the front lines of this crisis right now, every day putting their health and their safety at risk to deliver services for children and families. But as so many have said, this is also a moment of opportunity. I'm going to add, I think it's also a moment of obligation for us as leaders in the field to advocate for the fair pay, fair benefits, equitable access to training and opportunities that we talk about for our young people. We need that for the adults in the workforce too. We need them. And I mean we, not just on this call, but the people, the big we, if we're going to be able to put our communities back together, provide support to families, and have the full economic recovery that I know that so many of those that we are working with are concerned about. Thank you.
Jeff, anything else on the youth programs? And then over to Nick Yoder and Jim DePaoli as they're talking to educators.
Yes, and throwing some information into the chat box, but the systems that have been designed are resulting in the outcomes that they're resulting in, and this current context is only going to seek to magnify and reinforce many of these pieces, right? So, but this also has created some opportunities for us to dream of something new, and the good news is that we don't have to reinvent it. We've talked about science-informed equitable supports for thriving youth today, right? And all of the recommendations in the SEED report, the Science of Learning and Development, would point to for us to create whole community collaboration to support thriving youth and families. So some of the things that we're doing, yes, we're working to address the current context, ensure that our programs, if they choose to, are equipped to provide emergency childcare services. We're advocating by creating GIS maps of our locations close to hospitals and police stations so that we can elevate our profile amongst other state leaders. So using the current opportunity to advocate And also, this is a moment of bureaucratic agitation. And we have a problem of silos in probably all of our communities in our country, right? So what we're working on in California is something, and we started this in December, is what's called the Collaboration for Whole Child Health and Wellness. So how can we build on our platform to enhance our nutrition, mental health, as well as medical, dental, vision, and other social service connection to our already existing infrastructure to create the conditions necessary for thriving youth. Lots of information in the chat box. Definitely hope you'll follow up with us.
Fantastic. Jen and Nick, powerful duo.
Yeah, hi, thanks Marita. And can I just say amen to what everybody has already been saying? At LPI, we've been thinking about this very similarly, and we've been thinking about kind of a three-stage response: the immediate response, which we've obviously been working on alongside all of you, looking at responses to distance learning, serving vulnerable student populations, especially including students with disabilities, the SEL, mental health, and trauma-informed practice, and then also disruptions to educator prep and those types of things. Next, we'll be moving more on to not only continuing that work, but then also thinking about the CARES Act and trying to help people think about how that money can be spent, in addition to the other stimulus funds that will be hopefully passed over the next few months. And then lastly, like has been said repeatedly over this call, thinking about the re-engagement of students in the fall and how schools can be better prepared to meet these needs should distance learning be put into place again. And I'll let Nick, and I will just also say too, very much on Hal's point earlier today in terms of rethinking how the schools work and rethinking school design. I think that's very much where our focus is as well. With that, I'll pass it over to Nick, because we'll be working with them on some of the back to school re-engagement pieces.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. And I definitely echo everything that everyone's been saying. I'm just going to quickly point, there's a lot of stuff that CASEL is doing around CASEL Cares and COVID response. But I think one of the things, and you can go to our website for that, but I think one of the things I really want to hit on is just how we are contemplating and thinking about and talking with educators about how to reimagine schools right now, particularly when we're thinking about, accountability systems and testing has been canceled in many states this past year. Now, how is that going to then think through the next year? How are teacher evaluations and educator evaluations? How are we connecting more broadly with you all in the after school space and extended learning opportunities and summer learning, right? Like, how can we be more cohesive and connected to the whole child in the different avenues that we're situated? And really trying to think about, as Jen mentioned, how can we leverage some of that CASEL Care funds and money and policy mechanisms to really support and enhance that work, and then how that can get translated back down into districts and schools, and how can we really create that cohesive system is some of the stuff that we're really thinking about along with many of you and many of our partners.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks.
Again, I encourage folks to go to the document where there's more resources. Mary Ellen Wiggins with the Children's Cabinet has posted what governors and businesses are doing to be able to help bridge the digital divide. Bethany with the Ed Council and Sold Alliance has resources that they've been putting out to folks around a range of policy issues and thinking long-term beyond the next year to 5 years. What does it mean as we're responding to the current economy and all of this? So more resources and a commercial, because what we're hoping to do is get some interest and conversation going here, and then we're planning to have a deeper dive into these topics and others in a couple of weeks. And so you'll be getting the invite to that webinar. I think you're seeing some of the need for the connection on this and thinking about a different way of doing business, as all of these both are targeted issues, but they all interconnect and relate. I'm going to turn over to Karen and Hal to give us our closing reflection. And thank you to this incredible round robin group of folks who are doing just such powerful work, but also amidst all that work to get this session together as well.
Great. Al, do you want the next to the last word?
Sure, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to gather together with everyone and learn so much about what folks are focused on. I think Ross put it well: the more we can have coherence, the more we have a sense of what it is we think are going to be necessary and can present that as a sector or a series of sectors, ideally, the better off we'll be. And I think if we're able to talk through the jagged kind of year we'll see this year, and talk about flexibility, not just in getting additional funds, which is critically important, but talk about the ways in which we can engage young people in thinking about what additional flexibility might generate for us. But this has been a fantastic discussion, and we look forward to working with you both in these kinds of settings, in person when we're allowed to, and across the country in the Readiness Project. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Hal. Thank everybody. Thank our partners. This has been a huge amount of work, harder than it thinks to get this many people on screen in a short amount of time. You know, when you go to the website, and we've just sort of launched the Readiness Projects on the website, you'll see that our goals are to make sure that we inform you, inspire you, get you involved so that we can all be implementing the kind of ideas, bold ideas that we've just talked about today. And I hope you can give us feedback on this format. We don't think you were bored. We may have over-informed you. We hope we inspired you. Clearly in the chat box, we have a lot of ways that we can get involved in each other's work. Part of what the forum tries to do is to align and get folks, create the forum for people to see how their work connects together. I hope we've demonstrated that. The other part of what we do is to really try to find important public ideas and figure out how to make them sticky and tangible and actionable. And you all have raised some powerful ones that we'll bring back in the next couple of weeks. One of the things I hope we can do as we talk about moving this forward to create a thriving youth field is to see if this does not sort of end up with, let's do a press release and say the Readiness Projects are open for business. Let's have an open letter that's a call to action. So we're going to come off of this call, take the chat, take the videos, have a conversation, get back to you soon with some opportunities to really galvanize the thinking that was on this call, which only scratched the surface of what you all are working on. When we pull back to look at the bigger picture of what young people need to thrive, what we need to do to really take a robust approach to equity, and how we need to make sure that the learning and development that we're focused on is not just for our benefit, but for young people's benefit so that they have a sense of confidence and agency and identity. We have a lot of work to do. We're going to be bolder, we're going to be clearer, we're going to be stronger than ever. Thank you for taking your time with us today.